On July 4th, 1911, Edith Tadcock, a Tlingit woman from Haines, Alaska, from the Luchachadi clan of the Raven moiety, and William Paddock, an Irishman, gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. But unfortunately for them, they were unable to take care of the baby, so they sought help from the Salvation Army. It was then that Jean and Andrew Wanamaker adopted this lovely, beautiful baby girl. "She looks like a doll, don't you think, Andrew?" "She's too strong to be a doll," Andrew replied back. The baby girl in question was Elizabeth Peratrovich. Growing up, Elizabeth Peratrovich witnessed many accounts of racism and racist remarks towards indigenous people. When attending school, Elizabeth had noticed that none of her teachers were native, and that they could not speak her native tongue. The schools had enforced rules that did not allow for native children to speak their native language. If they were caught speaking the language, they would be punished by their teachers. Their teachers would force the children to kneel on rocks and smack them with rulers. They also made their students write that they would not speak the language 100 times on chalkboard. Elizabeth had noticed that many of the places in her town were segregated, such as cemeteries, schools, hospitals, and movie theaters. There would be buildings that held signs saying, "No natives allowed," "No dogs, no natives. We cater to white trade only." While attending high school in Ketchikan, Elizabeth then met her future husband, Roy Peratrovich. In 1941, Roy was the leader of the Alaska Native Brotherhood, and Elizabeth was the Grand President of Alaska Native Sisterhood. Alaska Native Brotherhood was formed in 1912 by a group of Southeast Alaskans. Elizabeth's father, Andrew Wanamaker, was a charter member and founder of the organization. 2 years later, in 1914, Alaska Native Sisterhood was created. Elizabeth and Roy would have 3 children: Roy Jr., Frank Allen, and Loretta Marie, known as Lori. Later on, in 1941, Roy, Elizabeth, and their children went on their journey to Juneau, Alaska. In Juneau, Elizabeth and her family would need to settle down in a nice home. Roy had called a phone number to rent a place. On the phone, the landlord had said that Roy needed to stop by and complete paperwork. But when Roy and Elizabeth arrived the next day, the landlord asked if they were Indian. They replied yes. The landlord proceeded to say that, "Well, I'd like to help you, but other people who live around here don't want me to rent to Indians." It was not only the renting of places that stopped natives from living normal lives. Their kids could not even go to school because they were for whites only. The native school that the native kids went to did not provide the right education for native children. It was also a long distance to drive to and from. This would make Elizabeth attend a meeting with the school district office. The contents of the meeting are unknown. They could not even go grocery shopping due to segregation. The discrimination and segregation of the native peoples made Elizabeth and Roy determined to change the treatment of the native peoples. This would lead to the Anti-Discrimination Act of 1945 and an iconic speech from the Elizabeth Peratrovich. The Alaska Territorial Legislature held a meeting discussing the passing of the Anti-Discrimination Act of 1945. The Anti-Discrimination Act made it illegal to discriminate based on race. On the day it was passed, Elizabeth Peratrovich said her iconic speech that went like this: "I, who am barely out of savagery, would have to remind gentlemen with 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind them of our Bill of Rights. When my husband and I came to Juneau and sought a home in a nice neighborhood where our children could play happily with our neighbors' children, we found such a house and had arranged to lease it. When the owners learned that we were Indians, they said no. Would we be compelled to live in the slums? There are 3 kinds of persons who practice discrimination against the Indians and other native people. First, the politician who wants to maintain an inferior minority group so he can always promise them something else. Second, the Mr. and Mrs. Jones who aren't quite sure of their social position and who are nice to you on one occasion and can't see you on the others, depending on who they are with. Third, the great Superman who believes in the superiority of the white race." Senator Shattuck rose and challenged her. "Will the proposed bill eliminate discrimination?" Elizabeth replied, Do your laws against larceny and murder prevent those crimes? At least you legislators can assert to the world that you recognize the evil of the present situation and speak your intent to help us overcome discrimination.